How's it going, everyone? This is Daniel from the chess website, and welcome to our video. Today, we are going to be discussing the 3 knights game, not to be confused with the 4 knights game. The 3 knights game occurs after the following moves: white plays e4, black plays e5, white plays knight f3, black plays knight c6. So far, pretty normal. I'm sure you've seen this millions, well, not millions of times, but many times. And after the move knight c3, black can play the move knight f6 and make it a 4 knights game. However, the purpose of this video will be looking at the 3 knights game, which is characterized by basically any reasonable move that black can play other than to move knight f6. Now, why might black not want to play knight f6? It is the most common move and the most theoretical. Grandmasters play it. I even play it myself. So why might people maybe try to avoid it? Well, the thing is, these positions are extremely symmetrical, and sometimes they can get dry. Like, an example line might be, this position, white might go d4 and basically transpose to a 4-knight Scotch, and I don't mind these positions for either side. It could get sharp in some certain situations, but it can also just get pretty dry after moves like, bishop b4, just like takes, and then bishop d3. You just kind of see there's not a lot going on, maybe relative to other types of openings. So the reason why players might avoid the 4 knights is to get a little bit more in balance. So one example is we'll start with if black develops the bishop either to b4 or to c5. If black goes bishop b4, you can do a number of different things. You could probably just develop the bishop. You could maybe just play pawn to a3, just see what they want to do. There's not really a lot of bad options you can play here. But the most common move in this position is this move knight d5. You're simply going after the bishop, and it's pretty well known, especially the higher level you get. If they just let you get the bishop pair in the opening, you should generally take it and say something like c3 and like d3, something like this. Long term, generally, especially in a position that could open up, having the 2 bishops can be very advantageous. So normally, black will just move the bishop away. Bishop a5 is the most common way to do so, just sort of maybe keeping this pressure on the diagonal, maybe keeping the option open of going here someday and pressuring f2. And the main line here goes bishop c4, knight f6, and so black proposes sort of a trade of knights, or at least initiates that contact. We don't have to do anything about it. We can just castle, and it's worth noting, now I didn't check this, but I believe after knight takes d5, yes, we can just play e takes d5, and we're attacking the knight, and we also have an eye on this pawn, so clearly it would be pretty good if they release the tension first. And importantly, if they were to take this free-looking pawn, it might seem like, oh, there's just a pawn hanging. Like, what do we do about this? Well, we can just play this move d4 and just sort of crack open the position. The point is, we're attacking the e5 pawn, and if black just takes, we have this move queen e2 to pin the knight, and there's not really going to be a great way for black to get out of this. Like, they can play f5, but, they've weakened their king side. I imagine knight g5 is probably just winning. They're like ideas like this, although I guess they can block with g6, but you can just take, and like, again, they played f5, so you can't even castle because there's this lineup. So I would not worry too much about that pawn in this specific line. So another option for black is to go bishop c5. So maybe you're delaying the development of your knight, but putting the bishop on c5 first just to see how things go. And this is not bad, but you actually have a minor tactical shot in this position. It's very thematic in these e4, e5 openings where there's like a bishop developed and like a pawn on e5 that you can take. Knight takes e5. And the idea is that after knight takes e5, it might seem like for a second, well, I just lost my knight for a pawn. Like, what's my idea here? Well, it's pretty clear. You just go d4 here, and you're just going to win a piece back. And white does very well in these positions. After bishop d6, d takes e5, bishop takes e5. Here the move bishop d3 is good because maybe in some positions the e4 pawn could be attacked. Your long-term plan sort of is to go like f4 and then gain space. So the main line goes knight f6, castles, castles, and then after f4, black can play bishop d4 check, but we're not that worried. We just go king h1. And, you know, your long-term, you're just going to play like bishop d2, maybe knight e2 to kick away the bishop, and then possibly try to do something with this majority. And I'm not claiming that you're completely winning or anything like that, but you have a very comfortable advantage, I would say. So that's bishop b4 and bishop c5 from those positions. Another option is for black to play d6, but I would just say you have a pretty easy game if you just go d4, and after d4, black can go bishop g4, for instance. I mean, if they take, you can just take back, and if they ever take, you just take with your queen, and your queen's not really going anywhere. You have a very comfortable position here, and if they just develop with their knight, I mean, the game will go on. I imagine the theory is probably like maybe takes and bishop c4, for instance, or even like bishop c4 immediately. And I mean, you'll just notice that long term, all of your pieces are active, whereas a lot of black's pieces are active, but there's a glaring hole in their development, which is that this bishop will not be able to get out effectively. So I would say if your opponent plays d6, again, all these specific moves you don't have to necessarily worry about. Oh yeah, for the record, I believe the main line is d4, bishop g4, and then you can just play this bishop b5 move here. The point being, you're threatening this d5 move, which attacks the pinned knight, and so black will normally take, and you can kind of flex on your opponent by playing queen takes d4. Oh no, my queen. Well, not quite. So, anywho, and then you're just going to like develop your bishop, move your queen away if you need to, maybe castle long, and again, you just have a very comfortable position. That's what the Three Knights game is about. You're not winning out the opening necessarily, but you're getting very playable, comfortable positions to where you can put your pieces on good squares and outplay and potentially beat your opponents from there. So those were some options. Another option that black can try is this move g6. G6, I think bishop b4 is the most common, but I think g6 is close up there among like master level play. The idea obviously being to go bishop g7 and sort of imbalance the game that way. Here, white's best move. Again, you can't really go wrong with just developing the bishop or something like that, but the most challenging move in these positions are to play d4, and after d4, what you'll note in a lot of these like Scotch-like positions, I imagine there are videos on the chess website about the Scotch defense or the Scotch opening, is that, so the Scotch, and just sort of show you the theme, is e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4. So you have this structure to where you have the two pawns in the center, you're challenging them with the pawn on d4, and they only have one pawn. Black almost has to take. Like, theoretically, they must take the pawn. If they neglect to take the pawn, then you can just, well, first of all, you're threatening to win a pawn, so you could just do that. But if they even just play a move like d6, then you can just positionally steamroll them with a move like d5. And they even, I'm not saying this is the best line, but even if you play something like this, you just have a very good position just out of the opening. You have firm control of the center, your opponent is cramped, and yeah, so it's pretty well known that from these positions, we're looking at g6, after g6, d4, that black really should take. And if they don't take, you can expect to either be able to push or maybe take the pawn for free. So after d4, black just goes ahead and takes. And actually the variation I'm about to show you is technically an opening trap. So I'm going to rewind, and I would definitely pay attention and maybe take notes if you want a new opening trap to add to your arsenal. So once again, the moves are e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3. If black plays the move g6, here we go d4. And after e takes d4, we can play knight takes d4, and there are some good positions that you can get from there, certainly. You can play it sort of aggressively, almost like an open Sicilian if they played the dragon. But here, this move knight d5 is interesting. So what's the point behind knight d5? Well, you're sort of controlling some key squares, And it's kind of apparent. So black's most natural move by far is going to be bishop g7 anyway. You know, maybe practically they'll see that, like, oh, the knight is knight's in my territory, I gotta do something. I actually just noticed, if they go knight e7, you have checkmate. That's funny. If they go knight f6, then I imagine you just play this move bishop g5, which sort of comes up here in a minute. So after knight to d5, black will normally just go bishop g7 anyway. They're sort of incentivized to do so anyway to protect the pawn. And here we play the move bishop g5. After bishop to g5, so you're attacking the queen, and you sort of see the knight's power on the d5 square in that you're controlling a lot of potential blockade squares. Black has to know the move knight c to e7. If they play the move knight c to e7, which does undefend the pawn, by the way, you just take, and then you have a pretty good game. However, I imagine that most players at your level, they will probably go knight g to e7. Or they might go knight f6, which knight f6 just fails to e5, which pins and wins the knight. So knight f6 is a blunder, and knight to e7, knight g to e7 that is a blunder also, for a little bit of a less obvious reason. The reason being, even though this pawn, it looks like it's protected twice and only attacked twice, you can still take it. You can play this move knight takes d4. And the point is, after knight takes d4, if they're to take back with the knight, well, the knight has lost protection of its friend on e7, so you can just take on e7. The queen is trapped. You're just going to win a queen out of it, and you just have a very good winning position here. If black plays the move bishop takes d4 and just thinks, well, nothing bad is happening, everything's protected, and I'm just gonna be up a piece. Not so fast. You play this brilliant sacrifice. Queen takes d4. The idea behind queen takes d4 is if the queen is taken, then you have a checkmate in 2 turns here. So if you want a fun little exercise, I will invite you to pause the video. If you've done a lot of your tactics, then I imagine you'll see this very quickly. But in this position, you just have to move knight f6. The king is forced to the f8 square. And then this bishop h6 move is checkmate with the knight and the bishop. So just to sort of go over that opening trap, because I know you all love opening traps, and I'm happy to add one to your arsenal potentially. It's e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3. Black goes for his move g6. We play this move d4. Then after e takes d4, we don't quite capture on d4. We go knight d5. Black goes bishop g7. We go bishop g5. Black goes knight g to e7. If knight f6, they just lose a piece. So black will try knight g to e7. And then here we go knight takes d4. Bishop takes. Queen takes. Knight takes. Check. King f8. And then checkmate. Well, I think that's a good way to end the video. If you need to review the lines again, always feel free to just rewatch the video. There are a lot of lines there and just a lot of conclusions to where you just have a very comfortable position. But I would say if you have the white side overall and your opponent doesn't go into the 4 knights, then you should just have a very good advantage potentially out of the opening. But I would definitely have something ready for in case they do go for the 4 knights. So thank you so much for watching. This is Daniel from the Chess website, and I'll see you for the next video. Take care.